What's up, Craig? What's up, everybody? Welcome to Roundup. It's March 14th, I think, in Australia at least. It's March 14th. It's 2024. I'm pretty sure everywhere. And Roundup is a container where we check in every week. And you can kind of think of it as like a town hall meeting or community meeting for the Broom Radio Discord. Um, and we've been talking about Ramadan because I think Ramadan started like 2 or 3 days ago, depending on where in the world you are, and like the moon and stuff. And one of the questions which has been coming up is, what are you fasting from for Ramadan? If you know what Ramadan is. And I was just laughing about before because I went to like a dance meetup yesterday, and I kind of said like quietly like happy Ramadan, and somebody was like, "Oh, like, do you observe it?" And I was like, "I observe everything." I feel like I was kind of like it kind of it was interesting because I think like for me in this dance group, like it's like kind of like I think like dance for me is like by default about embodiment, but then I kind of realized that like embodiment means different things to different people. And then for me, embodiment is sort of by default about like energetic sensitivity. And then I was like, yeah, but that's not the same thing for everybody else. And then I was kind of like, well, for me, it's really, I basically said, like, I feel like everybody is like taking part in it because whenever a bunch of people are fasting, I feel it in the energy. And then I kind of felt like an alien, and then I just started dancing. Um, but yes, I do want to know how y'all feel about all of what I said above, and I'm gonna mute.
I really love that, what you said about like, well, it's still like whether you're celebrating or not, it's still happening, right? Like it's a reality that we're all a part of. And I've seen I've seen like discourse, I guess, um about like believing in astrology, and how like people will be like, well, it's not really about like belief per se, so much as it's about like experience. And I think that's really interesting. So it's like, well, yeah, it's like happening whether or not you're tuning into it or not.
Totally. I love what you said about it's about experience versus belief. Actually, I feel like the word belief and my usage of it has been very conspicuous recently. So I almost want to
Mhm.
like I want to like put a astral pin on that in this container. And
Nice.
that doesn't mean we don't talk about it now, but it also means like maybe we'll come back to it. But to be fair to the person I was talking to, they said, "Do you observe it?" And I was
Mhm.
like, "Yeah, like it makes sense to me that a lot of people don't observe these things." Like Adam said in the chat, the sensitivity to large-scale rituals and phenomena. I pluralized phenomena differently to how you pluralize phenomena. Um, but you're welcome. But yeah, like it kind of yeah, it was interesting for me to observe that people don't necessarily observe it, and I feel like they may, to use the term that you used, Anna, like they may experience it just like a lot of people. I'll say like quote experience Astro unquote, which to me is just like, are you sentient, right? But it's like they may not necessarily associate these like their experience with Astro or Ramadan or you know anything. The thought that kind of came to mind is like a lot of people sometimes get stuck in a traffic jam, but they don't know there's a sporting event on, you know, which
Oh,
which gives me a little bit more grace, a lot more grace.
that is
Um,
really a great metaphor. Love that.
Julie says, if Astro isn't real, why do Saturn returns do that?
For real though. As
And
someone
that's
who just,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, as someone who just completed my first Saturn return, I concur. What were you gonna say, Julie?
I was gonna say, I'm coming from someone who hasn't even experienced their first Saturn return yet, but just based on like anecdotes and like witnessing of say like family members or like friends,
Mm-hmm.
that shit real.
Yeah.
That was a bit of a flex. Like, I haven't experienced my first Saturn return yet. It's like saying
Bro,
you
I'm
don't have wrinkles.
scared. I feel like
It's
my
like
whole
I don't
life
have
has been a
wrinkles.
Saturn return.
My skin is unblemished.
Honestly though, like if I had like been doing the sorts of like explicitly spiritual things that you're doing, Julie, at your age, I feel like I may have felt a bit more prepared for my Saturn return.
True, that's also a flex, right? Like, not having experienced your first Saturn return and still being like explicitly spiritual feels pretty
I know. I'm like, what?
dope.
Like, are you kidding? Yeah, it really does sound like a blessing for real. What it says.
Well, there is some fasting discourse in the chat. I also wanted to say that with the traffic analogy, I was not trying to say that Ramadan is like being stuck in traffic, because that would be disrespectful, and I'm a very respectful and sensitive, culturally sensitive person, as y'all know. But yes, there is some fasting discourse in the chat. Hoda says, fasting is so occult to me. Yeah, and I feel that both in the sense of like it being occulted, like sort of in the dark for a lot of people, I guess. Um, I'm kind of curious if like food prices go down because there's less demand for food. But I don't think a lot of people know that a lot of people fast at this time. Um, Especially outside of say like Dearborn, Michigan. And then Adam says, thinking of the scripture about not letting yourself be seen as struggling when fasting, which I think also like maybe speaks to the occult aspects of fasting. But yeah, I think occult like colloquially just means sort of like witchy or esoteric or magical, and maybe that's the way that Hoda meant it. Yeah, Hoda says that's total. Go on.
Yes, that's totes how I meant it. And then I also think about the phrase I think you shared with folks in the room maybe like 2 years ago. I don't know. That was the first time I heard it. It was like autophagy, phagy.
Autophagy. I say
Okay,
autophagy now because it sounds cool to me.
it does. I'm gonna borrow that pronunciation. In the sense that like yes, like a cult in the sense that a lot of stuff happens without our awareness while we're fasting in terms of like body purification, cell regeneration, um like mental purification, this like ripening with time in the seasons because you got to do this whole like sun up to sundown thing. Then I feel like a lot of people, at least in my experience as somebody who's been doing Ramadan for almost 31 years. Well, no, I won't say 31 years, maybe 25 years, because my parents didn't make me fast like out the womb. But yeah, that's something that I hear from a lot of people is that they speak to also this like relationship or renewed relationship to consumption or just seeing consumption in a different way. So yeah,
Well, some
fascinating.
science there. like medical science and spiritual science, I feel like the container got really vast for me, at least. I didn't know we were going to talk about fasting like that. Do you want to go? Does anybody want to go deeper on it?
Yeah, I'm holding space.
Well, I guess like I'm holding space for that. I'm also holding space for if anybody wants to talk about how they experience Ramadan, either when they're fasting or when they're not fasting. And I also want to hold space for like how people think about fasting during Ramadan and or in general. And there's like a ton of other stuff I'm holding space for, but I won't mention it right now because that's already a lot of things. I feel like the first time I experienced I'll say the Ramadan effect. It was like when I was in Philadelphia, I think like 2021, during the Ramadan of 2021. And I was already fasting like 5 days a week, 6 days a week at that point. But then when Ramadan hit, I was just like, whoa. It was like everything felt like it's like, it's like when Whitney Houston sings, it's like I want to dance with somebody, and there's like the pitch change.
Yeah.
Kind of felt like that. And I wasn't like super sure of what was happening. Then at some point, like I was like reminded that it was Ramadan. I was like, oh wow, like this is the first time I've experienced Ramadan, um, being this open to energy.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Thought you were gonna say no. Um, I feel, I feel like I want to know, like, are you able to like translate it into like, were there like material things that happened to you that were like that
Mm.
you that you like felt were like tied to the like
Mm.
start of Ramadan? I guess I'm just curious because I'm like, I've never really tuned into it before, so I would love to hear you speak about it.
Mm. I mean, I don't think they're like solely associated with Ramadan, which is kind of interesting. But say like yesterday, the synchronicities were just like ridiculous. Like it was like rude. I felt like this, like the frequency and like the nature of the synchronicities I was feeling were kind of obnoxious in a way that I appreciate, because despite what I said about being respectful, I'm not really that respectful. So I also find it enjoyable when my guides disrespect me sometimes. Um, but yeah, I don't think I can name any of them concretely. Well, I'll say that like somebody shared. This is like the 25th of the synchronicities I'd had, and like had like in a 20-minute chat with somebody. But somebody shared an article with me about underwater volcanoes, and then the picture loaded up in Wikipedia of somebody taking a photo of the volcano exploding with their phone. And then the name of the volcano was also the name of somebody who just messaged me at the same time. And that person hadn't doesn't message me like every day anyway, and it's also a weird name. And there aren't that many volcanoes which have the same name as this person. I think there's only one. And it's also like not the name. It's not a name that people tend to like, because like, volcanoes and shit tend to be named after like explorers. So, you know what I'm saying? And then I was looking at my phone, looking at this picture of someone holding their phone, looking at a volcano, and then this person sent me a message. It was just like kind of obnoxious. And then it's like, when you say like is it associated with Ramadan? I feel like one of the themes of the chat so far that we're having is like likening it to astrology, which is interesting. But yeah, it's like you could just associate that with like the volcano and the person who shared the article about the volcano with me, who was a different person. But that doesn't like take away the association with Ramadan. And then the other thing I was thinking about is like, like yesterday was the first day that I noticed that the moon was getting close to being in conjunction with Jupiter and Uranus, and the sun was getting close to being in conjunction with Neptune, and also the moon was getting close to its closest point to Earth, right? And it's like those things are all kind of associated. It's like Ramadan, I feel like the fasting in the collective consciousness like opens people up, and that kind of like thins the collective veils so that the energy of those sounds, I would say, that those planets make in conjunction with each other is louder. And I would say like the energy of Jupiter and Uranus being in conjunction with the moon and the sun being in conjunction with Neptune is also like the sun Neptune conjunction for me is like thinning of the veils, or like some dissolution of like the extent to which we project our perspective onto reality, which is already, I would say, a little rhyming with fasting for me. And then Jupiter and Uranus are like kind of just like shattering veils. So there's like this kind of like expansion of Jupiter, and then like a shattering of veils with Uranus, and then a dissolution of self with Neptune and then the Sun. So the overall effect, I think, creates like the kind of portal through which really obnoxious synchronicities can occur. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you. Very crystal clear to me. Thank you. So interesting.
And then, yeah, it was funny. I went to this like dance thing, like I was saying, and then I was like, "Does anybody study astrology?" But apparently, everybody was too kind of like transfixed by me doing Tai Chi while I said it. But then later on, somebody was like, "Oh, the new moon's in Virgo," and I was like, "No, it's not." But anyway, I feel like saying that the new moon's in Virgo when the new moon was in Pisces is kind of like a new moon in Pisces thing to say.
I'd have to agree.
What kind of dance? What it says? It was like a contact jam. That's her sister. Nice try there. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I am not. I was definitely not born Islamic, and I have not. Ooh, this is kind of spicy. Most people would not consider me at all like Islamic, I'll say. But I definitely feel like I chant the name of Allah a lot, and I was chanting it a lot last night. I was just like running around in this dance workshop, screaming like Allah so, Allah so. But I'm fairly new to this, so I'm very curious to hear if there are any correlates that show up for people with the kind of experience I was talking about.
Yeah, I'm curious too. Also, Hoda mentioned that like, is Lent happening right now?
Mm-hmm. So it's even bigger.
Yeah, and like, I feel like there was something else that I was tuning into as well.
Oh yeah, Adar.
Of Adar, yes, yeah, which just began on the new moon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Purim is coming up shortly.
Which is like a pretty different energy, I want to say, right? To like Lenten Ramadan.
Purim?
Yeah,
Yeah,
like it's more about like, I would say, yeah, like vengeance and right.
Honestly, like I get in these moments all the time where I'm like, I'm Jewish, I should know this. That's why I signed up for the Ashkenazi folk magic class so I can learn more, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I'm Jewish, but you know, I feel like my embodied knowledge is still kind of limited.
Mm.
I've got my
Mm-hmm.
own traditions in a lot of ways. Also, sometimes I feel like a lot of it is like veiled from me, actually.
Mm.
That's how I really feel.
Super interesting. I mean,
Yes.
we're just talking about both like shattering of veils and the dissolution of veils.
Right.
So yeah, and I think like maybe the timing of you starting this folk magic course is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm just like thinking about my experience the past couple of days because like yeah, I wrote this in synchronicity. Like I had a conversation with my mom about demons the other day, which was like, that's like pretty unheard of for me. To like talk to my mom about this kind of stuff.
Mm.
I usually like, you know, I keep I keep I've like created a lot of compartments between like my family and the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just like thinking about veils and I'm like, oh, those
Mm-hmm.
veils seem to either be like shattering or dissolving or something. Something's happening.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm. Did any of her demons get triggered by you talking about demons?
No. I mean, no, she was just like she was very well regulated. I mean, I wasn't like, you know, I wasn't saying like, "Hey mom, I like believe in demons and like I work with demons." Like, I was just like it was like casual. Like I was just like, just like kind of like waiting and like seeing how she might respond to like me bringing up the concept.
Mm.
Um so it felt like very contained to me.
Mm. And then how did she respond?
I think she was just like, "Oh, that's like so the first thing that I told her was like, so there's a tradition at Jewish weddings where you like the person who is getting married or the people who are getting married, they stomp on a piece of glass.
Oh yeah,
That's just like something you do at Jewish weddings."
I
And like
know.
just for all the boys out there, okay? But and there's like all these theories about like why we do that, and like some of them are like, oh, it's like to represent like the like
Mm.
like the breaking of the temple in
Mm-hmm.
Jerusalem. Well, it's like all this kind of stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
then but what I learned in this class was that actually it was like to make a loud noise to scare demons.
Mm. Wow,
Like, wait, what?
that's super interesting.
Right?
Just as an aside, this is also why like lion dances, if you or dragon dances, or as I recently learned in Hakka culture, which is like people call like Hakka people like Chinese gypsies. Like there's unicorn dancing, or Qilin or Kirin dancing. Um, but like there's you've probably seen it, right? Like maybe
I don't think I
listeners maybe. But it's like there's like people who dress up and they get under these blankets and they've got like big lion heads and they're like
have.
dancing. Like there's like cymbals and drums. Have you seen
Uh-huh.
that kind of stuff?
No, but I want to now.
Oh wow, yeah. I wonder if I think it is more of a Southeast Asian or South Chinese thing. than like Northern Chinese, and like there are less Southern Chinese in different parts of the country than there are in Australia or in, I think, in the US as well. But yeah, like making a lot of noise is a huge part of like scaring away the demons. Also, I think this is why like gunpowder was used in
Interesting.
China as well. But yeah, going back to what you were saying, so like you like dropped this lore on your mom, and
Yeah.
like she didn't like ask Google Maps to take her to a mental health institute.
No, she didn't. She was just like, wow, that's fascinating.
That's nice.
It was fun. And then we
Um,
talked about the Jewish Enlightenment a little bit.
what? What's
Yeah.
that?
It's just like, I guess it was like a period of time where like, well, I don't think it was that probably I need to do some more research, but I don't think it was that separate from like the overall like the general period of enlightenment
Mm,
where it's like people kind of like um turn to like rationality and like,
mm,
you know, these sort of like these folk magic traditions were kind of like relegated to the margins and like
interesting.
kind of like, yeah, oh, these are just like, women's superstitions or whatever.
Mm,
Yeah.
wow. I am going to read about this and ask about it.
Yeah.
It's called Haskalah.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Interesting.
literally had never heard of it before.
Hmm. I'm gonna have
So,
to read into it because it
yeah.
seems like, I mean, on the surface of it, I would say that it seems kind of like very diametrically opposed to a lot of the things we talk about in the broom, right? Which is like folk magic, ritual,
Yeah.
um, witchcraft, and stuff like that. And I'm curious, like, is there a bridge, or like, are we just gonna turn the broom into uh, a rationalist discord? Like, what's
Wait,
yeah,
I feel like you may have wait, I'm not under I feel like you may have misunderstood what I said.
oh. Maybe. I mean, but it sounds like these rituals got like became occulted in that time, right?
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Yes.
like what do you think? Yeah, how do you like hold these two different things?
I'm not I mean, I feel like that's kind of like what I'm finding out, I guess.
Mm, very interesting.
Because
I guess like the image that came to mind was like of this like kind of pendulum.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and it kind of makes me wonder if it's like going, like I see happening in the broom a lot, and also like a little bit outside the broom, although I would definitely love to see more of it, is like, this kind of thing where it's like, okay, we're going from like folk magic and like storm magic and stuff like that, and then we go into like rationalism. We're developing like critical thinking, and like we're developing instruments for
Mm.
measuring things and drawing like conclusions from observations, and then
Yeah.
we're sort of coming back to like, oh, like, what's the intersection of like science and spirituality, which some people
Yeah.
call like science, right?
Right.
um and it's not just like a pendulum in place, but it's like a spiral.
Right.
um
Yeah.
yeah.
And I feel like that's been coming up a lot for me recently, like, this idea of like reanimating science or like re-indigenizing science. Like it's come up in
Mm-hmm.
Sharia book club before,
Mm-hmm.
we talked about it. And I've
Mm-hmm.
like seen a lot of discourse in the wild
Mm-hmm.
about it. Yeah.
Shame. Mm-hmm. And I think like I think Hoda started talking a little bit about uh I would say like a really interesting topic for that remembering, I would say, of like, I'll call it natural philosophy and science in
Mm.
the form of fasting, right? Because Hoda was talking about, I want to say, like the physiological effects of fasting, which
Mhm.
I think connect to metaphysiological. Is that a word? Did I just invent it? Metaphysiological effects. Um,
That's sick.
and yeah, like the way that changes, let's say, in the way that our body is like sourcing energy, right? Like people talk about it in terms of like burning ketones, change the way that energy moves around our body, and then that changes the way that all the different parts of our body work, which I
Mm.
think changes the way that intelligence and uh, interperception happens between like the different cells of our body, which ultimately like changes consciousness, right?
Woo.
Like one of my, well, yeah, I'll say like my somebody I respect a lot, who's both spiritual and also really into nutrition, was telling me that people who study different forms of epilepsy have found that, like, you know, people who switch to intermittent fasting from a regular, quote unquote, like regular diet sometimes see that like seizures disappear or
Whoa.
become less frequent or less severe.
That's wild.
Um, and you know, like that could be a number of different things. Like it could just be the cessation of the uptake of like preservatives. It
Mm.
could be the, you know, like the cessation of the uptake of like lactose, gluten,
Right.
peanuts, any number of things, right? But I
Yeah.
think like the fact that fasting is occurring and then that's leading to, I would say, like less erratic neurological function is a topic of interest for spiritual scientists or metaphysicists, I would say. Oda says, I had a friend who found out after he reverted to Islam during Ramadan that he could stop and reduce his seizures, right?
So
That's
fucking wild.
that's awesome. I
Yeah.
mean, I had a friend who'd passed away because they had a seizure in a bathtub shooting.
Oh
So
wow.
like, it just makes me feel so many things because I feel like intermittent fasting, just like, you know, we don't even have to talk about spirituality, right? But it is like almost undoubtedly like the way most of our ancestors, like as a body of collective consciousness, let's say, experienced food
Mm.
for most of the time. Like agriculture is super young.
Right.
And then I would say even like this idea that there's like 3 meals you're supposed to eat a day is like really young. Um,
Right.
and then like the kind of food that we're eating and like how we're sourcing it, like whether some of like whether we're all working on it, you know, all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So you know, like the fact that people are like having seizures and stuff because of things which feel somewhat arbitrary and new, just makes me feel a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense to me.
And you know, not only like I can totally imagine that, you know, a bunch of people who may have like suffered from starvation in their lineages, when food's available, they might be like, oh, like I'm gonna eat more. But
Hmm.
then when you understand that there are like food lobbies, right? Like there's like agricultural, industrial lobbies promoting certain diets or promoting the consumption of different foods or
Hmm.
promoting things like the idea of like the necessity of 3 meals a day,
Hmm.
it starts to feel like less like, oh, like, yeah, I get that you're traumatized. And so you're like eating more and more like, oh, like y'all are trying to like make more money.
Mm.
And those things are also related, right? Because I think, yeah, Julie says fear of scarcity. It's like, yeah, scarcity trauma probably makes people more larcenous, um, but doesn't make me feel less things. um, and yeah, I think again, like more reasons why I feel like this is not only a topic of interest for metaphysicists, but also for people who are interested in health, interested in the welfare of their fellow humans, interested in the welfare of bioregions which support human activity and agricultural activity. Yeah. But yeah, Hoda was talking about autophagy, cell regeneration, and yeah, this is all like very much like stuff which is within the so-called wheelhouse of Western biomedicine, let's say. But I'm curious if anybody wants to speak about like, I want to say like the metaphysics of fasting, which, you know, we previously already connected to like physiology, but more the kind of stuff that we tend to think of as like maybe like conceptual or intentional or like related to things that we think and do versus things which are happening, like let's say autonomically in our physiology as a result of fasting. And maybe I can make this more concrete by asking like what are y'all fasting from again? If you're fasting.
Yeah. Nice.
I mean, I think it's probably worth saying that like if people aren't familiar, I'm actually not really super sure about what fasting for Lent means, but like what I've observed is a lot of people will stop eating red meat, and they'll maybe sometimes give up something which is not necessarily food or drink related, but sometimes for Lent.
I'm
That's
just
my
laughing.
understanding. But you know, like my understanding of Ramadan, especially like growing up with like I'll say Malay Muslims in Australia, was that people would dry fast and fast from food from sunrise to sunset. Anna says, "Could I fast from fasting?" Maybe she didn't want me to read that out, but I think I'm trying to figure out what that means. I guess that makes sense, because like you fast most of the time, right? Not necessarily intentionally, so to speak, but like maybe like you feel cold not to eat a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So like fasting from fasting would be like eating. I
Yeah.
think that's legit.
It feels like I've been like nudged to like prioritize like eating lately. On the flip side.
It reminds me of this conversation I had with my friend again, like at this dance jam yesterday, where she was like, "My superpower is procrastinating, and lately I've just been doing things." And I was like, "I believe in you. I believe that you can be really good at procrastinating again." But yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. Do you want to talk more about like why you feel like you might be called to fast from fasting?
Just because, okay, so like basically what I get from like the concept of fasting is like you're doing something that you would like indulge in. You're like not doing something that you would like indulge in ordinarily. And you're like kind of like following your intention. So like for me, like I indulge a lot in not eating. Like I like just don't eat a lot. Um
I feel like this is gonna like fuck with people's heads a little bit, like because I think a lot of people indulge with food, or I would say like comfort themselves with food.
yeah, and I'm like, yeah, it feels a little weird to speak about because it's like I know it's kind of uncommon, but like um yeah, it's just like really I've always found it really fucking inconvenient to eat. And so like it's not like I don't like food. Like I love food. I love eating, but I just like find it really difficult to like nourish myself
Mm-hmm.
in a way that's consistent and like in a way that sustains my energy,
Mm-hmm.
or like in a way that would like fuel me for like the work that I want to do. So
That's real. Julie's saying I can relate.
yeah.
I mean, it takes energy to digest food, for
Right.
sure. Like, this is why in a lot of cultures they don't start with salad. I feel like it's crazy to start with salad because it's like, yeah, it's like revving up your car on a cold day and just like trying to do like a wicked 0 to 100 or something. Like in Chinese culture, you tend to start with soup. And I know like in the Italian cultures I've been involved in, like if you eat salad at all, it's maybe at the end of the meal.
Right.
Um,
Right.
because in Chinese culture they say like you cook food twice, like once in the kitchen and out, and the other time like in your digestive system. So if you don't cook it in the kitchen, then your digestion has to like work overtime, which is going to take energy, which can also
Mhm.
mean that you're not digesting food properly, which can mean that it creates inflammation in your system, which can mean that your body is extending energy towards like putting out all these little like quote unquote fires in your body. So I can totally understand what you mean in terms of like, yeah, like this may be like counter instinctual idea that like eating can actually take energy away from you, or at least not feel like it's like giving you the energy to do what you need to do.
You're talking about putting out fires, and I was just remembering that I had a dream about chaparral the other night.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Chaparral is it's a I guess it's like a kind of like a type of like biozone, right?
Yeah.
So it's um refers to kind of like shrubland, mostly in like Mediterranean climates, which I would say like cover maybe like 8% of the surface of the planet, but contain 20% of the biodiversity of the planet, which is interesting. Go chaparral. But yeah, they do tend to be like in areas which are more prone to fire, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm just kind of tuning into my channel to see what's ringing my bell. Yeah, I guess like indulging in not eating is kind of interesting. I'd say like what comes up for me is that like when I'm fasting, I feel really clean and really clear.
Interesting.
I feel like really connected, and I feel really light and energetic, and I feel really grounded as well, though I wouldn't say that's always been true when I fast. Like earlier on in my path when I fasted, sometimes I felt a little less grounded, which also felt fine. But I can also see how some people might call that a form of indulgence. And then I'd also say that, like, in general, I feel like just changing things up and having a different perspective on reality can give us opportunities to get traction on different karma, right? And, like
Yeah.
I'm very much about karmic release. And I feel like, oh man, there's so many things which are coming up. But I would say that, like, the Taoish ideal of like acting effortlessly happens in the absence of karma. And then in order to release karma, we have to like, for the most part, touch it in some way. And if we're always just like in one view, we're operating in the world in a certain way. Let's say like you're always intermittent fasting, then there's probably a ton of stuff that you don't encounter when you're not fasting. Like say
Right.
FOMO. Like if I'm having like FOMO because I feel like, oh, I could be channeling more, then I would say, yeah, that's probably a demon, and I'm going to release that by
So do the
from fasting.
opposite.
Yeah, and I experience the same in the way that I commune with all kinds of like external actors, right, or external agents like
Yeah.
marijuana, tobacco, coffee, any kind of food, water, anything that's not like in my body, let's say.
Yeah.
So that all makes a lot of sense to me. I'm going to read out, yeah, what it says. I feel like my soul sits easier in my body. Um, I believe that's in reference to fasting.
Yeah. Get
Julie says, I've noticed accidentally fasting versus intentional fasting. That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Especially with spiritual intent feels so different for me. Totally. It reminds me, I know Julie and I kind of met in like, I want to say like the quote, born day community, unquote. And like Kensu used to talk about, he used to call it dead fasting, like when you fast without intention. And I feel like what that brings into the chat for me is, yeah, like kind of similar to what I was saying about releasing karma, but I would say, like, let's say just to keep it simple, if you're fasting from food, I would say every time you think about food, if you have an intention, then it's an opportunity to like remind yourself of that intention. And this gets to the etymology of fasting, which is to like, you know, this is not etymology, but to make fast, which is, I would say, for me, I want to like bring in like the image of a kneeling. So it's like a kneeling is like something which happens in metal work where you take fragments of a metal and then you kind of like meld them together to make more whole fragments. So it's like every time you think about eating, if you're fasting from eating, it's an opportunity to like take that part of you which was thinking about eating and then like kind of combine it with the part of you that wants to like abstain from eating in service of, say, being closer to your ancestors, being closer to like your family, being closer to like what you call God. And yeah, please disagree if anybody has any other ideas on that. But that's for me like what etymologically the term fasting relates to. And I won't say that necessarily relates to karmic release because I feel like I'm going to say something kind of spicy, but I would say that like any intention which is formed symbolically and conceptually is an alignment with a demon. And demons aren't necessarily bad, right? Like demons can be like what I've called like symbiotic from my perspective in the past, in the sense that they can be like bridges to, I would say, like direct or unmediated experience of the divine. And I'd say they've definitely served in that way for me. But hopefully y'all can see how literally saying like I want to, even saying I want to have an unmediated experience with the divine, if you're saying that with words and concepts, you are invoking a thought form. And if you think about food and you're fasting from food and you say like I want an unmediated experience with the divine, you're like giving that awareness to that thought form. And also that thought form could be a spaceship, metaphorically speaking, which helps you get towards an unmediated experience with the divine. I don't know why Adam's using the poop emoji. Hopefully your pants are unsullied. And it says, yeah, I've had a hard time with fasting as a concept, so this is helpful because it just sometimes feels like withholding nourishment from myself, which is something I already do. Yeah, but you know, like even without that intention, like say if you're just like accidentally fasting, I would say that the physiological effects are still happening. So it's kind of more like if you want to combine it with an intention, then that's almost like a bonus. Or if you want to have an unmediated experience with the divine by not having an intention and just giving over, I would say, like your self concepts, choice making faculties to your body's, I'll say, will or sechem, which may be directed towards creating an unmediated experience of the divine, then that's also available, right? I don't know how to contextualize what Adam said, so is that making sense for y'all, or do y'all have stuff to add? It's been funny because we've been talking about fasting in the room for like, I want to say 3 or 4 years, or 2 or 3 years, or whatever it is.
We
I've
have.
been meaning to dig up the natal chart for the broom again, but
I have it.
you know, yeah, you're gonna drop it in ruins and create a thread for it at some point.
Oh, that's a great idea. But you're not gonna
Yeah,
like it because it's from Time Passages. I don't think you like Time Passages, but
yeah, but I'll just take the relevant info from it and then
okay.
put it into a proper app.
Okay. Sounds good.
I'm just kidding. Definitely not gonna chart it on a Vedic chart though, because that shit's whack. Anyway, um,
Adam, are you gonna defend Vedic astrology? Adam has
I
been like, but oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was gonna say I don't believe that he threw out a gauntlet on the entire Vedic astrology. I think he just does not like the design of the charts. But I like the diamonds. I think they're cool.
I'm glad you like the diamonds. I'm gonna mute for a second.
I was gonna say Adam has like kind of kickstarted like I want to say like a investigation into Vedic astrology in the room.
Oh yeah, that is a major roundup topic. I think that's a good roundup.
Yeah, and I'm like really grateful for that personally because I've been like meaning to get into it for a while, but I feel like sometimes it takes for me takes like people who I care and am in community with to like be excited about something for me to be like, ooh, I'm gonna look into this now.
Hmm. Which is a
So
very valid way, I would say, to learn.
yeah, I think so.
Um, yeah, Adam says it helps to talk about. I mean, like concretely, what Adam did is he created a thread in the Moon channel in the lineage space called the Clock, which listed out all of the nakshatras, the lunar mansions of Jyotish
Mhm.
astrology. Jyotish? I think that just means astrology, right? I'm not sure. I'm like exposing myself right now. I just said like ATM machine in Vedic, but maybe I don't know. But anyway, the nakshatras are there. They are described in terms of how they correlate to the tropical zodiac and I'm not sure which sidereal zodiac, but also like how they correlate to asterisms and deities and
Mhm.
plants and some other things, because what I'm finding out is Vedic astrology is highly detailed.
Mhm.
And then people were invited to emoji react on the messages which represent these nakshatras with their placements, which is a very interesting way, I would say, to like collaboratively explore the nakshatras. And it's pretty exciting.
Mhm. Yeah. So if you're not in the broom and you're listening to this, you should join the broom, and it's 11:11 p.m. now. So I rest my case.
Yeah, the angels have spoken through Anna. It's so funny because this connects to, it's like there's this running joke, I feel like, where we make fun of Miriam Hasna for like having cited like angelic guidance um in like the way that she deals with HR in her
It's just so
little cult.
absurd.
Um
Her team is like
Julie says, who's
divided.
Anna gonna fire? What'd you say? Sorry.
I was saying that, yeah, and I think it's funny because I still want to know like how her team is divvied up in the HR. Like, is it Seraphim? Is there like a Seraphim collective, like an Ophanim collective? Like, are the wheels
Cherubim.
turning? You know?
Right. The cherubim are like the janitors, like they clean the toilets and make sure that there's potpourri um in the bathroom. I don't know. They make sure there's Kool-Aid in the water cooler. So Adam says Jyotish means in Sanskrit literally the science of light, which is
Ooh,
dope.
that's so cool. Wow.
Super dope. I'm not trying to start fights with Sheridan. I'm trying to start fights with Mariam Hasna. Come on now. Keep up. I've been trying to start fights with her. Anyway, I'm just gonna tune in a little bit. See who the angels are trying to tell me to fire. Julie says if you say Mariam Hasna 3 times in the mirror.
She also spelled her name wrong, which is funny to me.
Mariam Hassana. If I say Mariam Hassana 3 times in the mirror, then probably like 150 different people from different communities in the world are going to appear in my bedroom. Well, I'm kind of feeling pretty complete for this container. I feel like we dropped a bunch of lore about fasting. We talked a lot of shit about stuff. I think like we broached some serious stuff about fasting and spiritual science. How are y'all feeling?
Feels pretty good to me.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say this has been another edition of Roundup, and we are in the Broom Radio, which is a production of, I'll say, the Broom Discord and the Pot. And I know this is confusing, and I don't know why I'm like this, but I am like this. And we are like this. But if you want to join the Broom, you can look at the description. There's going to be a link there. It's probably going to work. Wish you a happy Ramadan. I'm not going to try and speak any Arabic right now. Wish you a happy Lent. Wish you a happy Adar. Wish you a happy sidereal Pisces season, I'm going to say. And thanks y'all for listening. Do y'all have anything else to say before I disinvite Craig?
I don't think so. Thank you for the container. Thank you
all.
Tuned in.
Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in live, y'all. I'm looking forward to more silliness. Peace.